Kwazulu-Natal Premier Senzo Mchunu bows to ANC pressure and resigns. The head of the NPA wants to challenge the appeals court decision that corruption charges be reinstated against President Jacob Zuma. A very happy Monday to you. You're watching eNews Direct. I'm Duduzile Ramela.
And I'm Sandile Gangose. Good evening.
To comment on any of our stories, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook. That's at eNews Direct.
You can also track our main stories using the following hashtags: Senzo Mchunu and Spy Tapes.
Senzo Mchunu has resigned as Premier of Kwazulu-Natal. He confirmed the news to journalists at his home in Empangeni. Mchunu says he will cooperate with decisions made by the ANC's National Working Committee.
The man at the center of a media whirlwind has broken his silence about his rumored resignation. Mchunu says provincial ANC leaders called a meeting on Friday, during which 6 allegations were leveled at him. He says he was asked to resign by Monday.
The meeting covered resignation. They did say that I must resign, or I'm expected to resign today, not later than today. And they also talked about the intended redeployment. But they also made a request that I cooperate. I will cooperate with the decisions of the NWC in detail.
Mchunu says he'll be writing to Mandashe about his unhappiness with the manner in which the process was carried out.
And in particular with regard to redeployment, I will write to the Secretary General as a specific response on my part on that matter.
Mchunu's declined to comment on reports that several MECs in his former cabinet have been axed.
President Jacob Zuma will not be tried for corruption anytime soon. Prosecution's head Shaun Abrahams wants to appeal the High Court ruling set aside the decision not to prosecute Zuma. Last month, the court said the decision to drop 783 charges of corruption against Zuma was irrational and must be reviewed. Abrahams says the ruling compromises the independence of the National Prosecuting Authority.
National Director of Public Prosecutions Shaun Abrahams says the state will fight the so-called spy tapes ruling, a judgment that effectively paves the way for President Jacob Zuma to face a multi-million rand corruption trial. Abrahams says the judgment compromises the independence of the National Prosecuting Authority.
I can assure you I'm not a political lackey. Of course, this is a matter that affects the National Prosecuting Authority. It affects the work of each and every prosecutor. It affects each and every citizen that's the subject of a prosecutorial decision.
But in the case involving former crime intelligence boss Richard Mdluli, the Supreme Court of Appeal has already found that a decision by the NPA not to prosecute can be challenged in court. The NPA acted on that decision by reinstating murder and corruption charges against Mdluli.
You seem to have accepted what seems to be settled and trite law in that matter, but now we're not doing it in this case. Why?
Of course, the facts of the two matters are completely different. And the consideration given to proceed with that matter was, of course, taken by considering the facts of that particular matter.
The NPA is now seeking the right to appeal. But there is no guarantee that the High Court or the Appeal Court will allow its challenge to go ahead. Karen Moore, Johannesburg.
Thank you, National.
Meanwhile, NPA head Shaun Abrahams has stressed that there are no charges against the Finance Minister Pravin Gordhan. He was responding to rumors of Gordhan's pending arrest last week.
There are no charges of espionage being investigated against Minister Gordhan. There are no charges of espionage being investigated against any other person associated with what the media has dubbed the so-called SARS Row unit, namely the SARS High Risk Investigative Unit.
There's a heavy police presence at Hammanskraal, north of Pretoria. Calm has been restored after a day of violent protests in which at least 2 people were killed. Residents took to the streets over the removal of shacks that were illegally erected in an area near the Jubilee Mall. At least 8 buses and trucks were torched during the protests. Police investigating the deaths have appealed for information. It's unclear if those killed were members of the Red Ants, the company brought in to move the residents. Shops have been closed and traffic remains slow on the R101. Michelle Wege did enter South African territory using an electronic copy of her passport. That's according to Home Affairs, which has also claimed it was entirely legal. The Burundian national was collected by Defense Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula from the DRC 2 years ago and brought to South Africa ostensibly to escape her violent father. The presidency has still not responded to questions on whether Mapisa-Nqakula faces any action over the debacle.
Who will be as heartless as to leave a child stranded without anybody knowing how this child will be held, because this child was in a foreign country.
Defense Minister Nosiviwe Mapisa-Nqakula is adamant she did nothing wrong when she picked up Michelle Wege in the DRC in January 2014 and brought her back to South Africa aboard an Air Force jet. She maintains the Burundian national's papers were in order and that she didn't abuse her powers or privileges as a minister.
There's quite a thin line of debate between whether the better good was served by her taking action to protect this lady and this young person and assist her to get into a place of safety, or whether in good consciousness did she take a risk upon herself for possible criticism.
Home Affairs has confirmed Wege did have a visa to enter South Africa, valid until the end of January 2014, and that it was legal for her to do so with copies of her passport on a USB drive.
If a person can, with honesty, state their reasons of trying to come into the country and not having certain documents which are a requirement, the department is, in some cases, at liberty to allow a person to come into the country.
But there are doubts about whether Wege was indeed escaping an abusive relationship with her father. The Sunday Times reports he visited Wege in South Africa after her arrival in 2014, returning her passport in the process. Nicholas Bauer, Johannesburg.
A quick look at world news now, and a South African-born woman who was a lecturer in Australia is one of 3 climbers who've died on Mount Everest of suspected altitude sickness. 34-year-old Maria Stradom and her husband are both vegans. They were attempting to climb 7 summits to prove vegans are not malnourished or weak. Her husband has survived. About 30 other climbers became ill or suffered frostbite. President Barack Obama is on a visit to Vietnam, where he has announced the U.S. is fully lifting its lethal weapons embargo on its former enemy. Obama says the decision shows hearts can change and peace is possible. The warming cooperation, comes as the U.S. is seeking to build relationships with its Pacific allies. And police in Thailand are probing the cause of a fire that swept through a school dormitory last night. At least 17 girls aged between 5 and 12 were killed. Several others were injured. 2 are in a critical condition.
Time now to get into all of your social media with Duduzi.
Indeed it is. Thank you so much, Sandile. And sexual assault charges against suspended ANC Western Cape leader Marius Fransman have been withdrawn due to lack of evidence. Fransman was accused of sexually harassing a 21-year-old woman in the lead-up to the ANC's annual January celebrations. The complainant, who was Fransman's employee at the time, testified twice against him before the ANC's Integrity Commission. We end off with this. The Western Cape High Court has dismissed an application by SABC COO Hlaudi Motsoeneng for leave to appeal an earlier judgment. The court had ruled that his appointment was without merit and should be set aside. The court also previously found that the SABC was obliged to suspend Motsoeneng pending a disciplinary process. Last year, a disciplinary committee cleared him of any wrongdoing. In 2014, the public protector found Motsoeneng lied about his qualifications, acted in bad faith and abused his power. Remember, we do love to hear from you. You can, of course, check us out on Twitter and Facebook. That's at eNews Direct, or you can head on over to our website. That's eNCA.com/direct. We've got your business news after the break, as well as your weather. Money matters now, and Standard Bank has lost millions to fraud in Japan. The coordinated attack lasted 3 hours. When it was done, 300 million rand had vanished. The news initially sparked fear among clients and analysts. Standard Bank's shares were down slightly on the news, but the lender says there's nothing to worry about.
As Tokyo wakes up on a Sunday morning, a group of fraudsters is already hard at work in the city. Their mission: to steal an estimated 300 million rand, and they succeeded. Standard Bank, the victim, is calling it a sophisticated and coordinated attack. Thieves have used a number of fictitious cards to withdraw large sums of cash from various ATMs. The bank is allaying clients' fears, saying they haven't lost a cent. This is a loss the bank will absorb.
I'm sure we're going to find that there has been some form of internal collusion, and there's been a penetration of the security systems within the bank.
Cloned credit cards are suspected to have been used at 1,400 ATMs, and despite having alerted authorities to the loss, investors say they're not worried.
Initially it was 300 million, now there's been some reports that it's going to be impact of about 200 million. This is still very, very small if you consider Standard Bank's market cap.
Reports suggest that up to 100 people were involved in the fraud, which was committed a week ago. An amount of around 14,300 rand was withdrawn approximately 14,000 times. It's an incident that is likely to test banking security locally and globally. Sources suggest that the information was received from 1,600 credit cards issued by Standard Bank. Japanese officials say they will work with law enforcement in order to recover some of the money.
Right, let's see how the markets performed today. Let's check in with the Weather Centre now. Here's Louis.
Hello everyone and welcome to the Weather Centre. A quick look at the satellite imagery and we can see that there was a fast moving low pressure system and cold front approaching from the west today, and the cold front eventually made landfall during the afternoon around the peninsula. That brought showers to the area, and along with the support of an upper air trough, a couple of thunderstorms also moved through the region. To see how the system will affect the country tomorrow, let's take a look at the detailed forecast. Kwazulu-Natal remaining mostly unaffected for much of the day, but in the evening a couple of showers could start spreading in along the south coast of the province. The Eastern Cape, on the other hand, will feel the effects of the front as it will move through. We're expecting showers to spread along the coastal belt, and in the afternoon we could have a few drops of rainfall over the eastern interior, maybe even a bit of thunder for some places. A few showers over most of the Western Cape in particular for the morning, and we'll also see windy weather along the southern coastline at times. Into the Northern Cape, and there'll be light rain or drizzle at first over the western parts of this province. Further eastwards it remains dry pretty Prieska quite a bit cooler with a high of 19 degrees. Mild and dry weather expected for the Free State, except for Zastron in the far south, where a couple of showers will be possible, although very isolated. No rain in the northwest. After a chilly morning with a minimum of 6 degrees in Potchefstroom, you can expect a high of 23. In Limpopo, it's going to be a warm day, especially for the Lowveld, but Polokwane, as usual, cooler than most of the surrounding areas. It will also be a cool day on the Mpumalanga Highveld, a very typical autumn day across the province, warm to hot in the Lowveld, where Skukuza gets to 30, and it's going to be a pleasant afternoon into Gauteng. Johannesburg, you get to a high of 21, and it will be a chilly morning across the province. Let's move ahead to your forecast for Wednesday, and we're expecting wet weather to affect KwaZulu-Natal with cloudy and cooler conditions, a few showers and thunderstorms likely into the central Free State as well. And by Thursday, it should be quite wet up in the northeastern corner, cooling things down in Gauteng with a couple of drops of rain in Johannesburg and a high of only 17.
Thank you, Louis. After the break, a determined walker is changing lives with his marathon hike on artificial limbs. Welcome back. A young man is walking halfway across South Africa to raise money for people who need prosthetic limbs.
Worthy cause. Paul Steyn left Cape Town nearly a year ago and aims to return to the mother city in October.
The determined walker has already covered thousands of kilometers, and he's doing it all on artificial limbs.
Gauteng is the 7th province Paul Steyn is visiting. He'll wrap up his massive hike in the northwest and northern Cape. Steyn has already walked 4,300 kilometers of a planned 7,000 kilometer journey. His mission is to raise money for people who can't afford prosthesis.
After my studies and everything, I decided I want to start an organization, the Paul Steyn Foundation, and I start with a small project, just test myself. And then from my first project to now, I walk about 9,000 kilometers.
So far, Steyn's changed the lives of 13 people.
If it wasn't for Paul, my dream won't came true to walk again. I would have still been on my crutches or on a wheelchair.
Most recently, the foundation helped a young man who was homeless until a month ago. He lost his leg to cancer.
Big guy helped me too much, Baba. Helped me too much, Baba. Take me out of the street, and I'm staying at home now. I make exercises. I'm like another person, Baba.
People can contact Steyn through his website or SMS WALK to 38021 to donate 10 Rand to his cause. Gerrit Pretorius, Pretoria.
Here's a reminder of the day's top stories before we say goodbye. Kwazulu-Natal Premier Senzo Mchunu bows to ANC pressure and resigns. The head of the NPA wants to challenge the appeals court decision that corruption charges be reinstated against President Jacob Zuma. And that's a wrap from the eNews Direct team.
It is indeed. Rhythm City's up next. We're back tomorrow.
Have a fantastic evening.